Welcome to another episode of Silvie and Didy React. I'm Silvie,
And I'm Diddy.
and today we're reacting to a video about a member of the LGBTQ community feeling that they no longer belong and having some big regrets. Before we get into that, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. Well, Diddy, we're doing a new format for our
We are.
viewers, just so they can know we are two cheap guys that will find whatever free thing we can use to make these videos and make them longer.
Exactly. Yeah. So, viewer, we are now in Skype, and I think we can record up to 24 hours of video in Skype. So look out for the 24-hour live stream coming to you soon.
Yeah, right. We're going to do some really long reactions to some of those homemade documentaries.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, without beating around the bush too much, can you intro me more of that video? Because I'm very intrigued.
Yes. On the deep reaches of TikTok, there was a video where this lady who is a lesbian talked about her frustration with what's known as the LGBTQ community.
Yeah.
And for those of you who haven't been paying attention or been online at all, there's a bit of a rift developing. And it's going to explore this rift between the transgender kind of agenda, and then let's call it the gay rights agenda.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I'll go ahead and bring that up and we can just jump right into it.
Sounds good.
Okay. So are you seeing the
See
video?
it.
Okay. Let's play it.
So here it is, the most unpopular opinion I'll ever do. I hope you guys duet and stitch and save or whatever you need to do to this, because it's going to get down fast. If I would have understood when I was younger that fighting for my rights as a lesbian would mean allowing children to drag shows, attaching child molesters to our community, and allowing children to change their sex before they even know what their favorite color is. I would have never done it. Never. So here it is.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, that's all right. It's a short one.
Yeah. Wow. That's
So
heavy.
I sent this one to you. What was your first reaction to that?
Yeah. I mean, I guess my first reaction is, so when you first described that the video and then that this woman was a lesbian, the last thing I imagined is that I would find myself agreeing what she says with what she said. And yeah, I mean, I guess what she's saying is exactly mirroring my thoughts on what's been happening the last
Mhm.
several years with the as you said, the trans agenda, where you have this push for extremely young children to make this decision about their sex, which, from what we know, has permanent effects. Especially like how can there not be an effect when you delay puberty?
Right.
You know, so you have children doing these things, taking hormones before their brain is even fully developed, and then, like she said, and being more accepting and inclusive of the MAPS community. For those that don't know, MAPS is the new way of saying, or what it stands for is minor attracted persons.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that's what she's referring to when she says child molesters.
Right.
And that's an extremely euphemistic way of saying that these people are sexually attracted to young folk.
Yep.
Which I agree with that. And then, yeah, I'm curious what your thoughts are, but I mean, I guess I'm in complete agreement.
Right. Now, I had two thoughts. So, like, the first was it reminds me of this analogy that C.S. Lewis used, where it's kind of this, you know, picture thinking that because one step is good, the next step is also good. Um, and so let's say that you're in the boat where fighting for gay rights was a good thing. And okay, like this is the next step then. He said the logic, and it's in a different context, but he said the logic was like the Irishman who bought this special type of stove because he could heat his house for half the energy. And then, supposing that to be true, he got a second stove thinking that he could heat his house with no energy at all.
Ah,
And so there's like some logical misstep where you don't think through the logical steps and you just assume that the next step will be like the former step.
hmm yeah, I've seen some interesting studies kind of in this very same thought process
Mm-hmm.
where, there are some great companies out there that do things that supposedly reduce carbon emissions.
Right.
And but they're looking at the long-term environmental impact. And so, for example, one of these was a company that would go out to, third world places and
Mm-hmm.
give better cooking equipment
Yeah.
to people in villages that otherwise would not have it. And ironically, carbon emissions actually end up increasing as a result of that, not because, right, you would think, oh, it's a more efficient stove, so it should heat for less energy cost. But
Mm-hmm.
it turns out that because it's easier to use, they use it more.
Right.
And it actually results in more carbon emissions.
Mm-hmm.
But it's exactly to your point that, a, 1 plus 2 doesn't necessarily equal 3 in this standpoint because 1 and 2, uh, you know,
Or A and B and then C are not going to be the same type of value. And
right.
so, yeah, no, I'm just, when I think about that, and I think about just a lot of the stuff that's come out of Europe. So I was researching this a little bit earlier on, kind of at the pinnacle of this movement, I would say. And you have the Tavistock clinic in the UK that was getting sued, and they eventually just shut down the whole operation. And there's been a, by and large, pause overall in Europe because they're realizing, wow, we don't have a good basis for this. And I think a lot of times it's tempting to use the language of civil rights, which, let's take that back one step further. The idea that your race is an immutable characteristic and it should not define whether you should a priori be considered smart and moral or not. Like that was kind of the big thing with racists, where they're just like,
Yeah.
this is an inferior race.
Right.
When you push against that, that's a different kind of push than, let's say, fighting for gay rights, and definitely fighting for what are called trans rights, or this idea that you identify as this gender, and so you should be able to socially and medically transition and all that that entails. Like, that's not the same step at all.
Right.
Yeah. So that was my first
Yeah.
impression. The second one is just, I wasn't surprised to hear that there's been a disconnect. Also, when I was in college, I studied abroad at one place, and then I came back home. And it was funny, I read this article in both of the college newspapers, so the one abroad and the one here. And there was this story where it's the LGBTQ chapter of these different colleges, my home one and the one abroad, where there was this rift. And it's because the president, who was a gay man, said a slur about trans people, and later had to apologize for that. And I thought,
Mm.
a lot of times we, and I think we being mostly the media, trying to project this idea of this whole unified front that is monolithic. There's no change. They're all agreed. Like, this is like, universal agreement within this group. I think that that's very foolish. And when you see a video
Yeah.
clip like this, it's clear that that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
This woman is fighting for, I want to be able to sexually express what I want with who I want, as long as they're a consenting adult. And that's a big difference. And then
Mm-hmm.
she later encounters like well, do they have to be adults? And she's like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, they have to be adults. And so there's that fracture and this idea of like, what gender? And like, these kids can transition, she said, before they know what their favorite color is. What? Like, I don't want to be associated with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the thing that is surprising, though, is that all of that would culminate in such shame that you would regret all that you did for your previous movement, which I'm assuming she had been rather proud of.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they call it pride, right?
Yeah. Yes, they do.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that point of like the deep, like such regret that you are not, you're no longer proud of that identity,
Mhm.
just speaks to the feeling I've had, and it's much more powerful when coming from someone who is a member of that community, right?
Right.
And it's like, me as a conservative Christian and a white male,
Mhm.
cisgendered,
Mhm.
heterosexual, right?
Yeah.
If we want to do, not qualified to talk on the subject at all, according to some people, but I look on and I see what just seems baffling to me, where our society would embrace and celebrate young people. And when I say young people, I mean less than 10, I mean 6 or 7,
Yeah.
who, again, um, you wouldn't trust those kids. Like, as a parent, you would
Right.
not trust those children alone. And yet we're going to take their word that my child who was a boy feels he is a girl.
Yes. Like, to your point, it boggles my mind when the same people that would say this is okay, if I were to bring up, should these same kids be allowed to get a full-time job? And they'd say,
Right.
absolutely not. And I'm like, why? They could be taken advantage of. Oh, you mean like somebody who's an adult could manipulate them into bad choices?
Mm.
And the same thing with like drugs and alcohol. It's like, well, should a 6-year-old be allowed to, smoke? It's like, no, like, they don't know what's good for them. Oh,
Mhm.
okay. Or like, should they be allowed to drink alcohol? It's like, no, like, that will mess up their brain. Oh, so like they're underdeveloped is what you're saying. Like, all these things where it's just like, this thing that we have a legal limit for, that thing that we have a legal limit for, even something related like tattoos. I have not met that many people who are pro 6-year-olds getting tattoos. Like,
Yeah,
very rarely will they be like, yeah, any body modification is good. It's no, just this body modification, because that's their true self.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I've not seen someone bring up that uh analogy of the tattoo. But yeah, that's a great point. I think a lot of those people who would celebrate uh trans children wouldn't necessarily agree to tattoos.
Yeah. Or, alcoholic children and
Yeah.
age
Yeah,
6. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, and it's like, again, it like the celebration of children going to drag shows
Hmm.
and some of these kids performing. And not that, again, it's like, I'm perfectly fine with drag shows if everyone is an adult and knows
Hmm.
what they're doing. But again, to your point, right, is there some psychological manipulation of the kids, right? And I'm not saying that the people who are doing this are acting nefariously, right?
Right.
The parents are trying to do what's best for their kids. They're trying to expose them to things that the culture kind of says is good for these kids.
Yes.
And then you see them performing these overly sexual acts, and they're
Yeah.
less than 10, and all these adults are celebrating it. And
Ye-
it's
Yeah.
kind of like like just a dystopian
Yeah.
uh dystopian events happening right before our eyes.
Yeah, I think too, just to your point, I think the parents tend to be inundated in this culture that says sexual expression and the right to sexually express is the highest value. And therefore, it's not going to be limited by anything else. I know we've referenced this from C.S. Lewis before, but like the idea of you do not have a right to be happy, this idea that sexual expression trumps everything else really does a number on people. And so, whereas the parent would cuss me out if I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna like employ your kid to work at the car wash, which is by far not the most dangerous place, but like they would be supremely upset. Same thing, like, oh, going to the drag show, oh, transitioning, yeah, like that's who they really are. I think that reveals that they have this mixed view of like what the highest good is.
Right.
And so yeah, and like
Mhm.
to your earlier point too about the this can't not change them. That was an early lie, and I can't believe that some people will still try to argue it, but it's like, oh, this is all reversible, like nothing's really happening, no permanent damage. It's like that's just not true. If you get more hormones, let's say more estrogen, like if you meet a pregnant woman who has more estrogen, more hormones, and they're just flipping out, you're not like, oh my gosh, what happened? You're like, oh, they're pregnant. Like that's the natural reaction and natural reason for what's going on there. Same thing if you hear somebody saying, oh, that guy has some roid rage. It's like, yeah, they took extra steroids and their body doesn't handle it well and they're being
Right.
super aggressive. Like we
Right.
don't it's not like we don't know that these things don't exist. So like let alone all of the physiological problems, so like with your
Mhm.
bones and your brain,
Mhm.
just like behaviorally, it's so evident that this changes you.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's something where it's like from both a Christian
Hmm.
perspective and I would argue from the evolutionary perspective,
Hmm.
this should undoubtedly have a change, right?
Yeah.
Because from the Christian perspective, we're intelligently designed by God
Hmm.
to function as we are.
Right.
Everything inside and out, we've been knit together intricately. God has a plan and a purpose for us, and He's designed
Hmm.
us this way.
Yeah.
But then from the evolutionary perspective, it's like our humanity has evolved and we've developed these systems within our body to maintain homeostasis. And,
Yeah.
over the course of time, the systems that we have now were the systems that resulted in the greatest number of new babies being born. And
Right.
it's like now we're playing with that symptom, with that system. We're
Right.
saying, no, that homeostasis that humanity has developed over centuries, over millennia, um, we actually know better about what is good for our bodies.
Right. Right. And you kind of go against the thing that will, propagate your DNA.
Right.
Like it will. Yeah.
Yeah.
One
So,
final, yeah.
oh, sorry. Were you about to say final thoughts?
Yeah, I was gonna say one final thought that just like another tangent before I summarize was another interesting one is like uh, trans in sports where it's like, oh, like this trans woman should be able to compete with other athletes. I hear that, and there's this just funny idea where it's like, oh, like people can be different. There can be really strong women, so like this makes no big difference overall. Logically, if you believe that, then why would you have a men's and women's sports? Why not make them all co-ed?
Right.
Like, if you truly believe there's no difference, then why are you fighting so hard for this separate sport, and then for this person who is female identifying to be in the female sport?
Right. And
Like,
not advocating for just everything to collapse together into
yeah,
code.
yeah, like that would reduce the cost of entry so much because it's like now instead of having to expend resources for two teams, you have one big team.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so it's like I think that there's a logical disconnect there.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. The
mhm,
trans and sport issue is definitely a whole nother thing.
right.
And I guess we don't want to go too far down that line, so maybe we can pull a video for that sometime. But
We
there's
should.
definitely other thoughts. that can be
But yeah,
shared.
all of it to like summarize that is like I think there are so many logical missteps. There's the Irishman, like the second stove will mean I can heat my house with no energy type reasoning. And I can easily see why this woman who fought for the first stove is like, what is wrong with your logic on this second stove?
Yeah.
So that's just my thought on the whole thing, where it's like, yeah, it's pretty evident. I'm not surprised to see that, but I am sad to see that this woman feels like her efforts basically meant nothing.
So my final reaction is just kind of dovetailing on what you said, is just like this idea that it seems like their worldview is inconsistent. They've gone so far into protecting rights for these people to do things that they're allowing them to do things that aren't good for them. Right? We've gone so far into protecting trans rights that when a child makes this declaration, we do things that just seem obvious that would harm the children.
Right.
So
fair enough. Well, with all that said, we will definitely try to bring you more videos on this topic and dive deeper into that. But thank you for watching. If you would like to see more videos like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And as always, send us an email if you want us to respond to a specific video or article. Until then, we hope to see you again.
see ya.